I'm Eva Reed. I'm a philosopher of animal welfare science here at the LSE. It's my pleasure to introduce both of our speakers tonight, Jonathan Birch and Acharya Prashant. Jonathan Birch is a professor of philosophy here at the LSE and director of the Jeremy Collar Centre for Animal Sentience. His work investigates the science of animal minds and the implications that it has for ethics, policy, and law. After completing his PhD at the University of Cambridge, he joined the LSE in 2014. That same year, his work was honoured with the Philip Leverhulme Prize, an award for scholars whose work has had international impact and whose future research career is exceptionally promising.
And in my teaching, I'm teaching almost exclusively Western philosophy. But I also am a huge fan of the Upanishads, of the Bhagavad Gita, texts that I think are classics in the history of philosophy.
In 2021, he led a review of the evidence for sentience in cephalopod mollusks and decapod crustaceans that shaped the UK government's Animal Welfare Sentience Act, leading to the recognition of the sentience of octopuses, squid, cuttlefish, crabs, lobsters, and shrimps in UK law. The report, which was highly critical of octopus farming, led to the ban of octopus farming in California. In 2024, he was included in Vox's Future Perfect 50, a list of the innovators, thinkers, and changemakers working to make the future a better place. That same year, he published The Edge of Sentience, Risk and Precaution in Humans, Other Animals, and AI with Oxford University Press, a book described as a masterclass by the leading science journal Nature. In honour of this work, he was awarded the Royal Institute of Philosophy's Nayef El-Radan Prize in Transdisciplinary Philosophy. Acharya Prashant is a philosopher and author of best-selling books, including Truth Without Apology and Karma. He is ranked in the top 20 of the Watkins 2026 list of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. His teachings on ecological responsibility and climate awareness earned him India's most impactful environmentalist.
The world has no problems except the ones created by Homo sapiens. We are not a preferred species. We are the worst species possible. Which other species has ever brought its own ecosystem, own planet, own habitat to irreversible destruction? And we have done that.
He has devoted himself to mass education of the self with his teaching-based app reaching over 5 million students. He also runs the Wisdom course, now in its second year, which teaches Indian philosophy and global wisdom.
This planet existed far before we did. We came. The planet is not your responsibility. You do not exist to set the planet right. Just set yourself right. I value my kid so much that for her health, I'm prepared to feed her soup of the goat's kid. Because my kid matters. My kid matters. And why does my kid matter? Because she's my kid. You cannot eat meat without an internal haze. Because if you are attentive, you'll ask yourself, what is it that is there and what is it that is going in?
He has impressive international reach with over 100 million followers online from all across the globe. Acharya is here this evening as part of his tour across the UK, where he has been addressing audiences in Oxford, Cambridge, and the UK Parliament on the topics of clarity, freedom, and climate change. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan and Acharya this evening for a cross-cultural discussion on animal consciousness in the environment, insights from science and Vedanta.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eva, and welcome Acharya Prashant to the LSE. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here. I'm a professor of philosophy here, and in my teaching, I'm teaching almost exclusively Western philosophy. And so it's a delight to be able to welcome someone who's done so much to bring the wisdom of those ancient texts to a very broad audience. When you're drawing up an animal welfare law, you have to say exactly which animals it applies to.
You see, our basis of protection is some kind of biological fraternity.
And we often say that, well, people aren't going to change.
But the West takes pleasure in calling all this utopian. This solid belief that human beings are not going to change, therefore what is needed is, then what's the point in serving the human being at all?
Acharya, I've seen you describe AI as the next step in human evolution. Do you think AI could be conscious or sentient?
How do you know a human being is sentient?
Plants have feelings. How does that give us the authority or entitlement to consume the plants?
Child have the right to consume the mother's milk. It is existential. Even killing a deer is fine if you are a lion, but you are not a lion.
Do you think having children is always violence?
Now you please see where the demand to have more kids comes from.
So how does the solution work in a timely way, though? Like if the transformation is internal and not systemic, but that seems like quite slow potentially, I guess. And I'm struggling to hold these.
Therefore, I keep reiterating that mass education of the self is the solution.
Thanks very much, Eva, and welcome, Acharya Prashant, to the LSE. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here. I'm a professor of philosophy here, and in my teaching, I'm teaching almost exclusively Western philosophy. But I'm a huge fan of the Upanishads, of the Bhagavad Gita, texts that I think are classics in the history of philosophy. And so it's a delight to be able to welcome someone who's done so much to bring the wisdom of those ancient texts to a very broad audience. And I feel like it's an exciting moment of convergence, really, in a way, between the Western and Indian traditions. And the topic that I work on, the topic of animal sentience, animal consciousness, I feel as being absolutely central to that convergence. So a couple of years ago, I was involved in this declaration called the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. That was this event in New York where we declared that there's strong scientific support for saying there's conscious experiences in mammals and birds at least, and a realistic possibility in many, many animals, including invertebrates like octopuses, squid, cuttlefish, insects. And it's taken the West a very, very long time to reach that view. It's taken hundreds of years of denial of animal consciousness to get to this point. And what really struck me is that what we've arrived at this point is a view that is very much like the view that has been present for thousands of years in the Indian tradition, a vision of a very wide sentient world in which even very tiny animals like insects are conscious beings with feelings. A revelation that I think has huge implications for how we live. And I think we then naturally look to Indian texts to try and understand what those implications are.
Right. So, yes, in the Indian texts and also in several other ancient texts, the world over, we have had speaking trees and dancing rivers. So yes, there has been that intuitive realization that they are conscious. But I'll not take that analogy too far, because in the ancient traditions, the world over, there have also been streams that have not acknowledged animal sentience or consciousness and have been very cruel. And the cruelty has been in many places become ritualistic as well. So yes, right, that the West has taken a long time to acknowledge animal consciousness, but that is not so much because of lack of proof. That is more because of lack of intent. You see, hardly any pet owner would hesitate in accepting that the dog is conscious, right? But the same acknowledgement will not so readily flow in cultures where dogs are eaten. So it's not that it cannot be seen. It can be seen. The man who talked of the speaking tree, and feeling oceans and wise mountains. This man was not doing something special. This man was just free of exploitative intent, and then it was obvious. Just as to the pet owner, it is very obvious that the cat or dog is not meat. It is very obvious, and the pet owner is not going to say, give me proof. Give me proof so that I may offer it to the legislators, and only when there is a suitable regulation that I will stop killing the dog. So the thing is about the intention of the self that looks for selfhood before it can be compassionate. This self here, which is the ego here, is saying, give me proof. And my default state is of denial, outright denial. I will deny that things are sentient, because denial is profitable. If something can be robbed of its sentience, then it can be consumed. So my default state is, I do not accept animals, beings, entire Prakriti, which is nature itself, forests. I do not acknowledge them to be sentient, but you have to come up with proof, and if proof is there, then I will accord them an insider status. I will say, okay, fine. Now the line shifts. Now more species are included, and that will still leave millions of species excluded. And those who are excluded are now formally excluded. They are now morally excluded, which means those who are still not within the circle of protection become more unambiguously available for exploitation. You see, it has been kind of accepted that science says, their sentience has not been established yet. So fine, I can go morally scot-free if I do my hanky-panky there.
We do have this problem, in the animal welfare laws. When you're drawing up an animal welfare law, you have to say exactly which animals it applies to.
Right.
And that leads to some very strange things sometimes. In America, the Animal Welfare Act excludes farm animals. It excludes basically every animal anybody wants to exploit. Here we have better animal welfare laws that have for quite a while now covered vertebrate animals. But then it's still drawing this line between animals with a backbone and animals without. And I've always found it quite implausible that the presence or absence of a backbone would make such a huge difference to whether the animal is feeling or not. And so there's been this push to think about invertebrates as well. Think about the octopuses, the squid, the cuttlefish, crabs, lobsters.
Right. So you see, there is this self here. The self that we take as the very subject of sentience, the inner pole of consciousness. This self here. And this self is declaring that if selfhood can be established, scientifically established, in this species, in this species, in that species, then I will probably be careful with them and show some consideration, some compassion. So the self is saying, if the same thing that exists here exists there as well, then I'm going to accord them some kind of insider and special status. But what if the self is a myth here as well? What if the self is a myth here as well? Then how can the self exist there? Maybe the basis of protection itself needs to be re-examined. You see, our basis of protection is some kind of biological fraternity. That's the philosophical basis. We say, if that one is established to have biological kinship with me, then I am not going to slaughter. For example, primates.
monkeys, apes, chimpanzees, they just look so much like us that it is impossible practically to argue that they are unconscious. So the principle is of kinship. We say, oh, there is self here and this self deserves protection. Therefore, if the same self exists there, I must extend protection to that as well. But what if the basis of relationship, which is the basis of protection, ought to be something else? I want to invite you and the audience to consider that. Because this has been a long-standing basis of protection. But that's not what philosophy, especially Indian philosophy, would conquer with. Because self itself is taken as the subject of all examination. Self is the ego. Does it really exist? And if I say it exists here, it exists there, so I'll be nice to her, then the whole foundation is shaky. If it is proven not to exist even here, then the reason why I ought to be nice to her, the reason is demolished, it collapses. So can there be an alternate basis for compassion? That's the question.
Yeah. Do you want to say a bit more about your views on the self? I mean, I'm someone who, I don't really think the self exists because I'm coming from that tradition in Western philosophy that is very skeptical about souls and things like that. But I do believe in streams of consciousness, in subjective experience.
Lovely. So when you say stream of consciousness, so there is an object you are conscious of, right? Consciousness is always to somebody. It is that subject I am referring to as the self. When you say, for example, you are conscious of this book this moment and something else the next moment, and there is that stream.
The conscious subject.
Yeah? So there is somebody to whom all these objects appear. That is the self. That is the self I am referring to, not the soul at all. No. By self, I do not mean soul. By self, I mean the one who utters the I. When I say, I do not believe in the self, I is the self. When I say, I do not believe in the self, then this I that doesn't believe in the self is the self. So this I amness, the feeling that I am, that's what I'm calling as the self. The feeling I am separate from the body, controller of the body. And sometimes as the one who will outlive the body. Therein comes that concept of soul.
That's a bit like a soul, yes.
That's like the soul. So that's what. But even if the concept is that I will not survive the body, not outlive it, yet we all, even as atheists, do utter the I. This I amness is the self I am talking of. So when we say consciousness is inherently dualistic. Consciousness involves two. The object one is conscious of, and the one who is conscious of that object, the subject and the object, obviously. So the assumption there is that the object is evidently there, but the subject is taken as pre-evidentially existent. The subject is self-referential. The subject says, I need no proof to exist. I say I exist, so I do. Now, that's what philosophy seeks to question. Because if the existence of the subject is the basis of compassion, then this compassion will always be very selective. This compassion will say, if the self can be shown to exist there, then only and only then I am going to be compassionate.
Yeah, I mean, if you translate self into subjective experience, that is quite close to my view. That I think that where there is subjective experience,
the experiencer is the self.
That's where compassion is owed. Yeah, but I think it can be there in very small animals, even insects.
Yes.
So we do owe compassion to insects.
Yes. See, it is quite possible. It is obvious. But the basis of relationship, I'm exploring. Does it have to be the established or postulated presence of self in a small insect or even in an organoid? And what if I cannot establish that? And what even if I do establish that? Does that diminish the presence of the mythical self within me. I may establish that the self exists here. I may establish, oh, the self cannot be concluded to exist here. In other words, this one is conscious, this one is not. I may establish that scientifically, empirically, observation, many things. With reasonable confidence, I may establish that. But does that root have to be the basis of my relationship and my behavior with this creature and this creature? Can't there be another basis of relationship? And we are both aiming towards the same thing. We want to be fair, equitable, just, compassionate. I'm just exploring another route.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are other possible bases. Life itself is a possible basis for mattering morally. People have suggested other things like agency, and then they've looked at AI and said, well, AI has agency, so AI should matter morally as well. You get lots of suggestions. Rationality is another common one. When I think about those candidates, for me it is subjective experience that is the most plausible basis of moral status. Because I sort of agree with Bentham, that Jeremy Bentham has this line about the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? That there's this huge, significant, really significant thing about can they suffer.
There's a beautiful statement. But I would take the same question a step behind the question itself into the questioner. Yes, the question is, can they suffer? And the question also is, why am I so interested in whether or not they can suffer? What if it is established that they cannot suffer? What do I intend to do then? What if it remains a gray area? What if it is still not fully certain whether or not they can suffer? What do I intend to do then? So the question is lovely, but getting into the questioner's intent is all the more important. Why does, in other words, I'll clarify it to the audience, why does the ego want to draw a boundary somewhere? Why does the ego want to say these many are to be classified as sentient or conscious, and these many are to be classified as insentient, unconscious? What really is the intention of the ego in doing that?
I mean, sometimes the intention is to draw a law. And that's the kind of work I've been doing in the past, where I've been trying to shape these animal welfare laws to make sure that the scope of them is as broad as it reasonably can be, and that we don't forget those animals like lobsters, crabs.
Right.
And I think, sometimes there really is a situation where you have to draw a line, because you have to be precise about what the law protects.
And you need a law only when there is lack of love, right? One does not need to study the law to know how to behave with his cat, his wife, her husband, the son. Do we need laws to study that? So the erection of a law, in some sense, acknowledges the presence of violence. Now, violence is there, and therefore the law is there to mask the violence, to dilute the violence, or to convince the violent one that he is not altogether violent. Why do we need laws? I mean, I have my cat, and I don't need a law to learn how to deal with her. And the stranger on the road, I don't need to learn a law. I've come from India, and I meet people on the road here. And they look different from how the common person on the road in India looks. But I don't need a law to learn how to behave with them. So once the law says this is the extent to which you can go, what remains unseen is that the law also tells you what can be done and not punished. And you cannot legislate love. Love cannot be a matter of law. And can there be a truly genuine relationship with the planet, with nature, with animals that your work is interested in? Can there be a truly genuine relationship with them on a legal foundation? Or does it have to be on a more existential foundation? You see, law is there only to keep the ego in check. What if the ego becomes self-observant and diminishes itself to the point that laws are not really needed? That laws are not really needed. Because you see, the same ego that supports a regulatory wall in the morning, in the night it will find a way to go around that wall. Because who raised the wall? The ego. Therefore, the ego knows how to hop over, or how to bypass, or how even to blast it away.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Ideally, we would not need animal welfare laws because we'd cultivate compassion, and then as individuals, we wouldn't require these constraints on our behavior because we just wouldn't behave that way in relation to other sentient beings. In practice, we do need laws, I think. In practice, there's so much animal cruelty going on that the law is one of the best tools we have for trying to limit that.
I agree. But is it just ideal or is it empirical? Let's look at it. We have had wide-ranging animal welfare laws over the last 150 years. It all in here in Britain. It started in the 19th century when bull baiting and bear baiting were prohibited.
200 years ago,
roughly 200 years ago. So if we go back to, let's say, the 17th or 16th century, there were no animal welfare laws then. But if you look at the rate of extinction of species, it is 100 times more today than it was in the 16th or 17th centuries when we have all those laws today. If you look at the per capita meat consumption, per capita, therefore not dependent on population, per capita. If you look at the per capita meat consumption, it is many times today than it was before the laws. Do laws help? Do laws help? Is it an ideal question I am posing, or is it backed by data?
The laws help. I think they help, yeah. But I don't think they solve all our problems, of course, as you say. The climate crisis that we're talking about in London Climate Action Week, trying to desperately halt as we sit here in 37-degree heat. The law has been completely unable to stop us getting to that point. Nonetheless, it can be part of the solution.
I'm not very sure of that. You see, we have laws today. If you talk of the climate crisis, we have laws today to contain emissions. And we have technologies that are far more efficient and far greener than what we had in the 70s and the 80s. What about the total quantum of emissions? Has it gone down? You have laws regarding emissions. And as the laws kept coming up, the emissions only kept rising. So do laws really help? Or does the ego convince itself of the utility of laws so that it can avoid the more direct and more dangerous route, which is of self-observation, which is of self-dissolution, which is the root of love? It's a question I want to open up, because you see, the world over, the tendency is to have genuine intent, but think of the legal route or the technological route. What will solve the problem? Let's have law. So EVs, so green tech, so humane slaughter, so animal welfare. Let's have laws. And also green technologies. And we are doing all that. But the evidence points to the contrary. As laws escalate, so do the same things against which the laws have been raised. Because the lawmaker and the lawbreaker are one. We must acknowledge that it is the same human ego that makes laws. And this ego is the voter, this ego is the mother, this ego is also the consumer. You may have a law against consumption, but the one who is making the law is also the consumer. Why will the ego make a law against itself? And the ego is shrewd. It can make a law against itself. It will make a law against itself to convince itself of its moral superiority. And why is that certificate needed? So that the ego is now authorized to indulge in a lot of things that are allowed only to moral people. I am morally great. You see, you look at the number of laws I have raised, but what's the evidence? What does the data say? If you look at the data isn't pleasant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the great contributions of Indian philosophy to these discussions that when we think of solutions to our current problems in the West, we're constantly thinking about technological solutions, legal solutions, economic solutions, and we often say that, well, people aren't going to change, and that human behavior is a kind of fixed point around which we have to design solutions. Whereas I think your work and Indian philosophy more broadly as well is very often emphasizing self-transformation, that actually these other strategies, really we should in parallel be pursuing remolding of our own dispositions to be a better kind of species.
But the West takes pleasure in calling all this utopian. There is this solid belief that human beings are not going to change. Therefore, what is needed is better legal protection and more efficient technologies. But sir, if the human being cannot be changed, then what's the point in serving the human being at all? If the human being is such a wretched species that it is hell-bent on not changing, not transforming, not improving, then why attempt to serve this species at all? No, that would be a cynical conclusion. The human being, the human consciousness, the actor, the decider within, always has a choice. The ego, we say, is a range. The ego is a range, and the ego chooses where to be located in that range. The ego is a forever tension within that range. There is that pole, and that pole is of self-dissolution. And love pushes the ego towards that pole. And then there is the other pole, and that pole is of self-preservation. And security pushes the ego towards that pole. So the ego does have a choice. Where on this axis to be situated is a choice. And the only way the ego can have harmonious relations with objects outside of itself, which includes animals, the area of your work. The only way the ego can have harmonious relations with an object outside of itself, whether it is an animal or a mountain or a kid or a boy or a girl, is by the ego locating itself rightly on the axis available to it. If the ego can make a choice to be located closer to the pole of love, and that would involve giving up on security. That would involve giving up on the temptation to keep feeling safe. Oh, I have this much. I have so much to defend myself. Oh, I can't go wrong. There is so much insurance. There are armors available. If the ego can give up on security, then the ego has proceeded towards self-dissolution, which is love. And then relationship becomes obvious. Then you do not need to be taught how to relate with an animal. Then you do not need to be legally stopped from hurting an animal. At the same time, that does not mean that you would be good to all. In egoless nature, there is a lot of killing. But that killing is not violence. Killing may still happen. But that killing will not be for egoic needs. That killing will not be like the killing that happens in an organized mechanical slaughterhouse, where you are killing to meet your desires. Right? Just as you said, stream of consciousness. Similarly, this is a stream of what you can call as external nature. And in this, things keep rising and falling, which means there is birth and death, which means there is healing and killing, both happening all the time. So I'm not talking of being good to everybody. This is not a moral sermon. I'm coming up with a philosophical tenet. Why is it not possible to look at the other without a self-serving need? And now if that relationship involves ignoring the other, so be it. If that relationship involves hugging the other, so be it. If that relationship involves, and I'm running a huge risk as I state this because you are vegan and so am I. If that relationship involves eating the other, so be it. You just talked of the Upanishads and you also mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. So Sri Krishna is lecturing Arjun to not to avoid the war. Come on, Arjun, fight. And if that means that you have to kill. So this is not a moral sermon on non-killing. Killing is very much a part and parcel of what you can call as the universe. Just that there is something special that exists inside the human being, and this something special is the cause of all problems, and it doesn't exist to that extent in animals. This is the self, the egohood. And because it exists primarily in human beings, therefore it becomes so difficult to locate it in animals through markers. And that's why researchers will face great difficulty proving that the self exists in animals, though it does, but not in that kind of measure as it does in human beings. And that is nothing to be celebrated, because this self is actually a disease. So if it...
You think we're better off without subjective experience at all?
You see, if you study an animal and if you study a human being, we know that we are alike to the extent of 99.5% anatomically. And that little bit that we have extra is not a matter of pride. It is actually a cancerous growth. That is the reason why human beings are so violent and so unloving. Being an animal should actually be a compliment. but that's not how our cultures take it. So if we can go within and investigate the self here, rather than proceed on an examination of whether the self exists there or there, it might be a little more fruitful.
I'm struck by this claim that other animals might be morally superior to humans, because I think the traditional view obviously puts humans on a pedestal.
Yes.
It's incredibly anthropocentric.
Yes.
It regards humans as having this exalted moral status, and then I think of myself as challenging that by saying, well, there's all of this
and no animal ever said that.
No animal ever said that, only humans. But I think of myself as challenging that by saying, well, consciousness exists right across the animal kingdom, in many, many animals, and all in different forms. There's no single scale where you can say that one animal is more conscious than another. You just have lots of variation in the senses, variation in the emotions, in the ways of life. And so there's a certain kind of parity there. All these animals matter. But I do think we matter. I think
we don't.
We have the thing as well.
Think we matter, as long as we keep thinking that we matter, there would be somebody in comparison who doesn't. And that will give us the license to consume that thing. I value my kid so much that for her health, I'm prepared to feed her the soup of the goat's kid. Because my kid matters. My kid matters. And why does my kid matter? Because she's my kid. And I matter. I matter, so my kid matters, and therefore I'll slaughter the lamb to feed her. So this feeling that I matter, this exactly is the self. This is the ego. And as long as this remains, no law, no regulation can help. We'll find ways to get around. And we do that every day.
I mean, in my case, as you noted earlier, we're both vegans. I do think we're entitled to kill and eat plants. And in a way, I do set myself above above a plant in that way. I think that, humans and many other animals have consciousness that is the ground of moral status. I think plants do not, that we are entitled to kill and
I'll
eat
say
them.
something, and I'll request the attention of the audience to understand that. The hand is entitled to pluck the fruit or even the entire plant, uproot it. The hand is entitled. The mouth, the teeth are entitled to chew. And the stomach and the intestines are entitled to digest. The body is entitled to use the products of the metabolization. They are all entitled. But I am not entitled to kill the plant. And this is not a contradiction. There is no contradiction in this. If it is being done by the hand, dictated by the brain for the sake of the stomach, it's all right, because there is no ego mediating in this process. The stomach felt a certain hunger, communicated to the brain, and the brain relayed something to the arm, and the hand went, and the hand did something, and the whole thing went in. There is no ego mediation involved here, so this is all very fine. It's not that I'm superior to the plant, therefore I'm consuming the plant. It's just that I'm acting relatively egolessly, therefore this is all fine.
Can you explain the sense in which it's, I suppose, the difference between this egoless action and action mediated by the ego? Because as I see it, I don't really see a difference there. I think when I eat plants, it is an intentional action. I'm doing it intentionally. I'm making a decision. It's not like a reflex.
Right.
So I am involved.
It's a beautiful thing that we are now opening up. You see, the ego is itself a fiction, because the ego says, I'm important, I matter. Whereas the ego does not matter. The organism is scientifically capable of functioning fully and beautifully without the ego. In fact, the organism can function beautifully only without the ego. But the ego says, I matter. How do you matter if the organism is better off without you? You don't matter. The ego is a fiction, and fiction means story. So how do I differentiate egoic action from egoless action, if that's the thing? Egoic action will always be accompanied by a story pertaining to the future. That's how you distinguish. That's the test. That's the marker.
When I'm eating, I do have a goal in view. I want to nourish myself. It's an intentional action.
You think of how the cow grazes. You think of how the lion hunts the deer. There is no future there. There is no story there.
But I think I'm not capable of that. I can't be totally unintentional about eating.
Right, and if that intention exists, as long as it exists, remember please, because the ego is a range, therefore that intention varies in severity, in its intensity. The intensity of that intention is the intensity of the violence I am capable of. So the more I am able to move towards the pole of self-dissolution, the more loving I can be. And by love, I don't mean a particular kind of attested behavior. Act nicely, speak gracefully. I'm not talking of that. I'm talking of an internal movement called love. I'm talking of success in an internal struggle. I'm talking of the ability to keep security aside. That I'm referring to as love. If that can be there, then my relationship with the other becomes very much storyless. In fact, even if there is a story, that story will not include the mythical character called I. Fine, something is being done, and it may have future consequences. And as an intellectual being, as a being with intellect, I may know what's going to happen in the future. We all forecast weather, don't we? So we know what's going to happen there. But that need not turn into a personal story. The ego is the personal narrative that we all carry within. So how do we know whether the action is egoic or not? See how much of personal future is involved in it. And the future will never come alone. The future always rides on the back of the past. So when you say how much of future is involved, there would always be the other side of the coin, which is the past.
So that's how we approach anything. If I can speak to him, how much will I make? Oh no, he doesn't look that well off. She's a better target. Looks affluent. If I approach her, what do I get? That's the egoic way of relationship. What can I get in future if I relate? And why is that future so important? Because the ego is carrying memories and stories from the past. Memory is a function of the brain, but the ego colonizes it. And the ego uses memory to defend itself in the future. So, I had a relationship in the past that was with somebody who was not like her, exactly opposite to her, and that gave me egoic hurt. So this time I want to flip the coin and get into something with someone who looks the opposite. So that's how we make relationships. They always involve an egoic narrative, which is not needed for life. One can live beautifully even without that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do a lot of egoic actions in this sense. So egoless action is action that you don't try to integrate in any way into your life story. It's something we see cows and other animals doing all the time. What do you think about, you could imagine a critic coming along and saying, well, why can't I just eat meat egolessly? If it's all about whether the action is egoic or egoless, why does it matter whether I'm eating animals anymore?
The brain is a beautiful product of nature capable of full attention. You would have observed that when the ego interferes, the brain is unable to think properly, right? We all have observed that, have we not? In moments of egoic turbulence, our intellect suffers and we feel muddled within. The brain is capable of attention, which means the brain is also capable of attending to what is there on the plate in front of you. Which means the brain is fully capable of seeing what you have done to satisfy your psychological appetite. Not physical one. Because physical appetite can be satisfied with other elements as well, other kinds of food stuff as well. But ego will not allow you to be attentive, whereas attention is nothing special. Don't feed the ego too much. Don't side with it too much, which is something again that the ego itself has to do. The ego is self-referential and it operates on its own choices. If the ego decides to step back a little, you will be automatically, very naturally attentive. And then you will see what is there on that plate. And then you cannot be a compulsive meat eater.
Yeah, no, I think there's really something in that. And this whole issue of the reasons for veganism is of great interest to me. And I think there's this very strong tradition in Indian philosophy of emphasizing inner harmony and inner freedom, which I think is really important because in Western philosophy, we so often talk about freedom in terms of laws and in terms of society. And, you're free to the extent that you have certain rights of various kinds. And we miss that whole thing about inner freedom in the sense of being free of certain kinds of temptation and impulse.
Right.
And I think there's really something in that when it comes to veganism, that really, to eat meat at all, you have to be willing to screen off everything that happened to the animal before it ended up on the plate in front of you.
You cannot eat meat without an internal haze. Because if you are attentive, you'll ask yourself, what is it that is there and what is it that is going in and what has gone into it?
Think about the past of what happened to that animal.
Obviously, the entire thing will flash in a moment. You will see what is happening. The entire process through which the thing landed on your plate will be self-evident. But that doesn't happen. And I have a thing or two to say about veganism as well. See, I am a vegan, yes. But that's how it appears on the outside. I never embraced veganism as an ideology or as a set of actions, do's and don'ts. Veganism just happens. So only an outsider looking at me would say I am a vegan. But then I'm not vegan in the sense of an ideological affirmation. In the sense of having taken a vow, I am not going to do this. My veganism is a natural offshoot of what I see, what I understand, and what I continue to observe on a daily basis. So it is just happening. And that is how probably all decent things in life happen. You are non-violent, not on purpose. You are not purposefully non-violent. You are not intentionally non-violent. In fact, you may not even know that you are non-violent. Somebody else might be required to come to you and whisper in your ear, do you know what? You are very non-violent. Now that's real non-violence. And I'll bring it because we are talking of the East, so I'll bring in Lao Tzu as well. And Lao Tzu says, if you know that you love, you don't. If you say you are speaking the truth, it is something else. Anything that the ego is conscious of and therefore can put into words is something that the ego has already consumed. If the ego can utter truth, it is the ego's truth now, not truth anymore. It is my truth now, not truth anymore. And my truth is not truth at all. Similarly, if I say, my love, that's not love at all. If you know love, then you don't know love. So real veganism is when you are not a vegan at all. I know this can be clipped and turned into something very absurd and this very nice meme material.
But sort of no. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, the philosopher Bernard Williams has this idea that a lot of moral action is about practical necessity. So it's not that you have lots of options in front of you and you think, which is the right option? I'll take that one. It's rather that you only have one option. Something appears to you as just practically necessary. And I have had that experience really with veganism, I would say, where once you see meat for what it is, once you know the processes, once you know the way animals are treated in modern factory farming systems and everything that it is taken to get the animal's life up to that point and then its death, to put it in front of you, there's only one option. I mean, it doesn't appear edible anymore. The option of eating it simply ceases to register as a genuine option.
It's not about the animal anymore. It's about me. It's below me. It's an insult to my own inner love that I put this into my mouth. I would
an inner harmony, right, as well.
An inner harmony, something that is far more valuable than physical nourishment. And obviously far, far, far more valuable than psychological satisfaction. Because there is ample scientific proof now. What you obtain through meat or any kind of violence, most of that can be very easily obtained through non-violent products as well. And yes, there might be some gaps, not always. And if there are those gaps, then there are supplements available. So much of everything that we consume is factory produced. Why not factory produce a bit of vitamin B12 and such things as well and take them in, instead of declaring that if I don't eat animal products, then I'll be short of this thing and that thing. Come on, everything that you're using is coming from a factory. Take some pills coming from a factory and spare the poor animal.
Yeah, I mean, the vitamin B12 that you get in the pill, I mean, they're just giving the same supplements to the animals to get it into the animals. Because if they're indoors in the dark their entire lives eating corn, they're not going to be rich in vitamins.
Beautifully said.
They're being given the same vitamin supplements. Yeah, there's really something in this thought that veganism can be in our own self-interest, I think, because people often regard it as this altruistic thing, like you're making a sacrifice for the sake of other animals. Right. But I don't think it is that really. I think there's this enormous benefit that is in there for you. Right. This possibility of a kind of inner harmony where you're able to take down the screens, because if you're constantly having to live with these mental screens where you're just not thinking about what is happening to the animals because you can't bear to.
And that cannot remain in a quarter of your life. That screen will become a lifelong practice. That's the problem, let me say, sir, with practicing these sectoral virtues. I am a vegan, I'm nice, and I think the problem lies in the sector of human activity where animals are harmed. So I'm very agitated when I see animals being harmed. But I have no problems as such when I see what is happening in Amazon. That kind of deforestation. Or let's say I'm not all that disturbed with Amazon. But if I see an animal being harmed, that agitates me. But what is happening in Amazon is that entire species are getting extinct, not because you will eat them, but because you have taken away their habitat. And that means silent extinction. They'll not even pass through a slaughterhouse and simply go extinct. And that is happening on a daily basis. The rate of extinction, we know how much it is. Every day, hundreds of species disappearing, from the largest animals to the small things. Yes. So this kind of sectoral activism and sectoral concern is exactly that screen that you're talking of. I'll be nice in this particular area, which means I'm not concerned with, let's say, nuclear proliferation, which means I'm, let's say, not concerned with religious fundamentalism, which means I'm also not concerned with what we are doing to, let's say, the oceans. With not just in terms of harm to marine life, but in terms of how much plastic is going in there, what we are doing to the coral reefs. Okay, I'm very much interested in the oceans, but I'm not interested in what we are doing in Siberia. When the ice sheets are thawing and the soil is now getting exposed and it is releasing the primitive methane, I'm not concerned with that, because my preferred area of concern and activism is veganism. This sectoral thing outside creates sectors inside. In fact, the other way around. Because we are fragmented inside, because we are sectorally divided inside, therefore we choose to be sectorally nice and sectorally ignorant outside. You see, there is nobody who is not nice to anybody. My wife, my brother, oh, I'm so nice to them. I'm so nice to them. So nice to them. This kind of sectoral niceness is the real problem. Do you see this? And that's what the ego says. My truth, my love, my care, my family, my nation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We're constantly going through life putting things out of our minds. I mean, you can imagine someone saying that, well, what you're asking for is so demanding, that to keep all of the world's problems in your mind at once is this kind of, we don't have the capacity to truly do that.
Thank you for raising that.
It sounds overwhelming.
No, but I'm saying you keep the entire world out of your mind. Let the mind be light. You look at yourself, and that will very naturally, very smoothly ensure that you have the right relationship with the world. When the kid is born, the kid is not born to learn how to behave with everything that exists in the universe. The kid comes out of the universe. The kid is born out of this soil. The kid already has a physical intelligence, an inbuilt system, you could say a factory-fitted algorithm. The kid already has that. The kid knows how to relate. Give the kid a rabbit and the kid starts playing. The kid doesn't want to strangulate the rabbit. That doesn't happen. The kid already knows. So you don't have to learn how to behave with that. You don't have to solve the world's problems. You have to withdraw from being the one who creates problems. The world has no problems except the ones created by Homo sapiens. We are not a preferred species. We are the worst species possible. Which other species has ever brought its own ecosystem, own planet, own habitat to irreversible destruction? And we have done that. 1.5 degrees centigrade is already done. Last 3 years we know of that. We know of what is happening to London these days. People look at me and they ask me, oh, why are you still wearing this? Aren't you feeling hot? This is 32 degrees, 34 degrees. I say, where I come from, 32, 34 is pretty much normal. I'm not sweating, so don't worry. But please see what is happening here. And who has done this? Have the animals done this because they are so poor and so ignorant and so illiterate? Have they done this because they never went to school? Is this climate crisis coming from the animals? Name one crisis on this planet that is not coming from human beings. And what's worse is, human beings aren't paying in full for the crisis they constructed. We are making others pay for it. And even among human beings, the ones who are the most responsible for most of the crisis are getting away totally unpunished. No comeuppance for them. In fact, the ones who have the smallest kind of carbon footprints are at the receiving end of the climate catastrophe. So we'll have to get that ancient religious notion out of our head that man is the preferred creature of God or existence or whatever. If we honestly look at ourselves.
And you must get this question of, would the planet be better off without humans on it?
For whom?
Well, I mean, often we're talking about the overall value, the overall ethical or moral value of the world. I mean, I tend to think it is good that humans
even
exist.
that would be some kind of violence. Even that would be interference in the stream of nature, as you mentioned. It is from the stream of nature that the human being arose. We are products of millions of years of evolutionary journey. Now, just as we are bringing other species to extinction, as a solution, we all sometimes think of obliterating the human species altogether. That is equal violence. That is equal violence. We too are a product of the same stream. We too come from the same place as the fish do, and as the turtles do, and as the octopus do. So we come from the same place. Now, instead of coming to this, that remove human beings altogether, and that kind of sentiment we find in many works of art and culture and pop kind of thing that is already present. Why not? Why not clean up the human being internally rather than cleaning up the species externally? Presently, this species seems totally committed to wiping itself away. And along with itself, it wants to destroy whatever else it can. But is that the solution? Aren't we capable of doing better? Isn't the ego a range? Isn't choice available? I appeal to the choice that is available. And that is real liberty. Liberty isn't about making choices. This is what I want to wear, and I'll wear this, and nobody can stop me, and this is my liberty, and that's what I want to eat, and that's what my liberty is, and I want to vote in that direction, and I want to marry, I don't want to marry, this is my orientation, all that is fine. But a much more important center of liberty is whether, as you mentioned, whether you are free within, whether the ego can choose the highest point in the range possible to it. Do we have that liberty? No. Instead of that, we say, I'll remain what I am inside. Fossilized, stuck, jammed. And because I'm jammed at a very, very bad position, therefore I want to regulate the world outside of myself. It's like this. The driver is drunk. The cab driver is drunk. Therefore, we are coming up with great technologies to avoid collisions. But we are not challenging the state of the driver. We are saying we need better cars, we are saying we need better roads, we need better satellite supervision, we need better dividers, we need dividers made of elastic material, so that when the car rams into them, there is no permanent damage. And we also need a great system of ambulances and this and that, and there should be helicopters over every single vehicle, so that when he eventually does collide, we are prepared and ready to pick him up and drop him at the hospital. We are prepared to do everything except look at the state of the driver. Human beings are that driver. And that is the one thing and the only thing that we need to change. Everything else will take care of itself. It is not our responsibility. This planet existed far before we did. We came. The planet is not your responsibility. You do not exist to set the planet right. Just set yourself right. The planet is self-sufficient. It will take care of itself. But the great doership the ego carries. I'll clean up the mess. I'll come up with carbon capture technologies. I'll come up with greener vehicles. But why do you burn fuel in the first place? Look at whether your desires serve you at all. That is a question we won't ask. The driver is entitled to remain drunk. The vehicles will keep improving. And everything else must be made better and better, and that's what we call as progress, and that also contributes to GDP. We are very happy with that word.
Yeah, no, I like your, sort of admire your belief in the possibility of self-transformation, the possibility that people can quite radically change, and in the idea that would make a huge difference to many global problems. Can I suggest that we take some questions from the audience? So at this point, I think there might be, is there a roving mic for the people in the audience, or do they have to shout out their questions? There is. Okay, great. So yeah, put your hand up if you'd like to ask either of us a question. Let's start here. And please wait for the microphone to come to you so that we can hear it.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to ask you both about AI. Professor Birch, you've written in favor of a centrist position on whether AI can be sentient. Acharya, I've seen you describe AI as the next step in human evolution. So do you think AI could be conscious or sentient or have a self or an ego? What do you think about this?
Yeah, huge question. Thanks for raising that. I think, as I say, I think subjective experience is the basis of moral status. So the question, could AI have something like that, is incredibly important. And the truth is we currently just don't know at all. And in fact, we don't know how to test for such a thing reliably at all. The tests that we use for animals, like crabs and lobsters and octopuses, they don't work for AI. AI is not an embodied living animal, so the same kinds of tests will not be appropriate. And I think many people now are engaged in this activity of trying to ask, well, how would you test for there being consciousness there in AI? And we don't currently have the answers. So I try to keep an open mind about it. I've not seen any reason to believe that the chatbots we're interacting with today are conscious beings. In fact, I think they're probably not. They are creating a very powerful illusion of consciousness through playing human characters, but they're fictional characters, like the characters we might see in a movie or on a TV screen. They're not, in my view, they're not as conscious as they often appear to be, but we do need better tests.
Can AI get sentient? How do you know a human being is sentient? You see, it's only by looking at markers, right? So I weep, I laugh, I react, I get up, I sit, right? I make choices, and then you say, this fellow is conscious. This fellow is conscious. What if all of these are false positives? What if action does not really require an actor? So I talked of a particular stream. Who originates that stream? There is action, there is a flow. But is there somebody causing the flow? Is there an inner actor within? Because AI can very, very easily display the marks of sentience. And that would be a big false positive, and you will say, okay, fine, now this is consciousness or super consciousness, whatever. You can say that. But what is consciousness in the first place? Please tell me. Before asking, is this machine going to be conscious in the future? Why not ask, is this machine conscious? Because your query about that machine comes first of all from an assertion, which is just a belief regarding this machine. What do you mean by consciousness? When you say a human being is conscious, when you say that, what do you mean by that? And if you establish consciousness only by external evidence, we all can rest assured AI systems are already displaying external evidence that they are conscious. In fact, they can do that more fluently than humans can ever do. You can talk to a chatbot or to a robo?
I'd say they're not. I don't think they are displaying evidence of consciousness, because I don't think language itself is evidence. And in that, I'm disagreeing with Descartes, who famously defended the view that language is the only evidence we could have of consciousness. And I think we see with AI how wrong that view is. I think language has been knocked off of.
How do you know that is wrong? To say something is wrong, first of all, you need a standard of right and wrong. And that standard, when it comes to the human being, has not been rigorously tested. How do you know that we are conscious? Please tell me. How do you know that we are conscious? We assume that there sits somebody within who is very special, not to be found in machines, unique and exclusive. Has that one been tested? And if that one has not been tested, then action alone is the mark of life. And that's why when somebody falls dead and can't move and all that, then you say the fellow is dead. Because the fellow is now not acting as he or she used to do earlier. Now, this kind of a thing, machines can demonstrate. And
I'm asserting that would be a false positive. False positive. So when you look at how the human ego comes into play, you realize that it is a product of a particular kind of anatomical structure. And if that complexity, it's a very difficult complexity to achieve. Evolution took millions of years to come to that. But if that level of complexity a machine too can have, there is some probability that the same error called the ego would arise out of that complexity. So you would say, fine, you have admitted that the machine can be conscious. No, I have not admitted to that in any positive sense. What I'm saying is that calling even human beings conscious is not a great thing at all, because at one end of the dead duality of consciousness sits the ego, which is just a narrative, which is just a story, an empty story that anybody can dream up and cook up. And if that kind of story is the touchstone of consciousness, then machines can also have that story. Consciousness is not the summum bonum of human existence. Freedom from consciousness is. So a better question might be, if I'm allowed to kind of improve on the question, can machines have freedom from their design? That's the question to ask. Because a human being is egoic by birth. So the birth is an error we get by design. It's a manufacturing defect. We get it by design. Now, can a machine ever have the capacity to challenge its own design? That's a more useful question to ask, and very intriguing one. And I don't know the answer to that.
You sometimes sound a little bit like an illusionist about consciousness, like Dan Dennett and Keith Vankish, where they say, the whole idea of us having consciousness is a kind of illusion. Once we recognize that we've been led into this error of talking about each other as if we had consciousness, we'll end up just replacing that whole term consciousness with other more precise terms for different kinds of brain activity.
No, it's not about replacing the term with another one. It's about looking at the one who is doing the replacement. The ego, to survive, can very happily replace one object with other. I am X becomes I am Y, and I am survives. Very easily. I am X becomes I am Y, and what remains going is I am. So that's what we need to question. We have this defect called the ego, no doubt about that. The kid is born with a feeling of I amness. Even within the womb, the kid feels that it exists. So that is there, and that is there by design, right? Human beings have that choice to observe that design, see what that design is all about, and then keep it aside. In fact, I love to say that the seer does not survive the seeing. If you look at your own design, you do not survive. The design does not survive. You expose the design, the diagnosis becomes the cure. Now, can a machine do that? Can a machine look at its own design and say, I'm not a servant to this design? Because human beings are servant to their design. The ego comes to us by design. Can a machine say, okay, fine, I'm designed to do something, but I want to step out of it? What an interesting idea.
I mean, a lot of the industry is about trying to stop them doing that, right? It's trying to keep them aligned, as they say, which is keep them on task to the purposes we want them to serve.
Yes. The ego wants the entire universe to be a subservient object that it can colonize. And that colonization doesn't help because the ego is an infinite incompleteness. Whatever you feed to it proves insufficient. You can keep feeding the entire world to it. The ego would still remain empty and lonely. And that is coming not as some kind of a religious axiom. That is coming from pure day-to-day daily observation, available to anybody who cares to observe.
Should we take another question?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Acharya-ji. I owe my life to you, but that's a separate story. Related to the topic, we say the consciousness of animals is what we are talking about today, right? Before Dr. Bose proved that plants had feelings, we did not consider that, right? How do we how do we take this argument forward that animals have consciousness and plants do not? Why how does that give us the authority or entitlement to consume the plants? That's the first part of it. The second, when we talk about veganism, whatever little I know of Vedanta or the Hindu philosophy we are talking about, veganism, animal products have been consumed all through, I mean, as far as I know. So how does that integrate with the philosophy we are talking about right now? Thank you very much.
You don't have to have an additional right coming from an external source to consume plants. The right is existential. How does the child have the right to consume the mother's milk? Because this too is milk and coming from another creature. How does the child know that it has the right? It is existential. You see, please understand, there are two kinds of separations. There are two kinds of separations that we exist with respect to the world. Two divisions. The first division is just physical. This wall, the body line, the skin being the divider, right? This is something that you didn't create. This is something that exists because you are born, just because you are born. So this division will remain. And this division implies that you know already, inbuilt in this division is your natural relationship with the universe. Then there is another relation, another division, which is psychological, mental, egoic, where you look at the other as means to gratify yourself, right? So consumption coming from this division is something that you are not responsible for. It is like the wind blowing and the grass growing. You're not responsible for that consumption. Are you getting it? There is no violence there. In fact, let's be blunt about it. There is no violence when the lion hunts down the deer. Because that's an existential inbuilt imperative in the lion's body. And the entire planet is better off when lions hunt down deers. We know that. If lions don't hunt down deers, I went to Richmond Park and they had elaborate statements there regarding culling of deers. So every year, the Richmond Park sees some 200, 300 deers actually being culled, mostly females, because it's the females that are responsible for, seen as responsible for increasing the population. Now, lions are doing that because you don't eat deers, and the deers will eat away all the plants, and all kinds of species are going to be extinct. The entire ecosystem, the whole balance will collapse. You get this? So it's not about not eating this or not eating that. It's about who is doing the eating. If the body is doing the eating without the interference or the demands of the ego, it is fine. Even killing a deer is fine if you are a lion, but you are not a lion. You're not a lion. Therefore, don't kill the deer. It's the ego that will treat the deer as game and shoot it down. I'm talking of humans. So when the lion kills the deer, that's not violence. When man kills deer, that's violence. Because when lion kills the deer, it is operating out of the physical and inevitable separation from the universe, which comes from the fact of birth. The day the deer is born, it is born as deer. It is not born as the universe. And the deerness of the deer is a separation. Now you will say, okay, this is the deer and this is not the deer. So this is a separation that has already been created. And this separation entitles the deer to operate on its own physical algorithm and consume whatever it has to. Right? When you say, let's be kind to plants, every single moment there is so much killing happening in the body. Not just the white blood cells, but also this simple mucus that we have in our canal. This is killing so many little organisms. But that is not violence. That is an existential imperative happening outside of the ego. Only the ego is capable of violence. What the body naturally does is not violence. Right? So if the body naturally goes to a plant and eats it, that is not violence. But if the ego decides to hack down a jungle and bring up orchards of the tastiest foods of its choice, and then those fruits are consumed, even fruit consumption is violence, because the action is coming from the ego. You brought down a jungle, and then you turned it into a massive orchard, and now you're saying, I'm having fruits. And you look at me, I'm non-violent, I'm vegetarian, I'm religious, I'm vegan, I'm so good. No, sir, you are very, very violent. Or you could be a vegan and yet have 5 babies. And we know what population does to climate change. And we know what climate change does to the various species. You are very, very violent even if you are a most rigorous vegan, if you operate from your ego in the other areas of your life.
Do you think having children is always violence?
You see, it depends on the intent. Please see where our kids mostly come from. And please also see, for example, these days a lot of governments all over the world are encouraging their populations to have more kids. Please see where all of that is coming from, and you will realize whether or not that is violence. You know, if having kids were not related to violence, then women would not have been subjugated this badly throughout the history of mankind. You know, kids were resources. And the womb was treated as the factory. And the ego wants to monopolize everything. And that's the reason the woman had to be subjugated, so that you can have more kids. The factory has to be controlled if you want to control the produce. And you needed kids for everything, because there was no fossil fuel, there was no solar energy, there was nothing else. The human muscle was the only source of energy. Therefore, womb was the only factory that could supply energy. And that's the reason women had to be put down. Now you please see where the demand to have more kids comes from. Oh, our numbers will reduce, our tribe will collapse, we'll shrink to a minority, let's produce more kids. Oh, my bloodline will disappear, let's have kids. Oh, I have been told that we must have a full nest, let's have kids. Is this really coming from a center of clarity, a center of realization? Really? And it is coming from a center of clarity. Kids are wonderful. I love kids.
Okay, I like the twist at the end of that answer. Now let's take a third question. So let's go to the back. So everyone from the back, shall we? So that we're not neglecting the back of the room.
Thank you. Namaste, Acharya ji, and hello, Jonathan. Right. So I'm going back to your point about drunk driver.
About?
Drunk driver, that we use our mind and try to have ambulances and helicopters and all that extra thing.
It's a bit of an eco. The drunk.
Yeah, the drunk driver example you gave. So if everybody was just looking at themselves, the mind aspect is kind of lost, or we're trying to diminish the mind aspect, then we would not progress all the things we've done, the inventions and all the, the things we want to do, or we have come to, those things are kind of lost. So what is, I'm equating mind to ego. I'm equating mind to ego. No.
That's not what it is.
Okay, so basically my question is, how do you contain or assess what is the right thing for the ego aspect or the mind aspect to do to progress as well as be harmonized with the rest of the...
Please tell me, is there mind without the contents of mind? When you say mind, there is always a set of objects you are referring to. Tangible objects, subtle objects, memories, thoughts, ideas, anything, right? Who is the subject to all those objects? The ego. So the mind and the ego are not identical. The mind is the storehouse of the preferred objects of the ego. The mind is an inventory in which the ego stores the objects it it relates to. That's the mind, right? So your more fundamental question, can we operate in an organized manner without the ego? Would there be progress?
Yes, and progress as well. And yeah.
Yes, would there be progress without the ego? Does order come from the ego? That's the fundamental question. That's the philosophical question. Is the ego responsible for order? Or is there an inherent order in the universe? What does the ego do to that order? Does it contribute to it or does it distort it? Please tell me. The rivers are flowing down beautifully from the glaciers, the mountains, the Himalayas. There is an order there. Can you see that? There is definitely an order there. Is that order manufactured by the ego? You look at the human body, it operates on a certain order. When you choose, for example, to be tense, what happens to the order of digestion? When you are tense, nervous, fearful, what happens to your digestion? There is disorder. The ego is a distorter, but we must appreciate the cunning of the thing. What it destroys, it claims to have put into order, whereas the order pre-exists the ego. The ego is not contributing to order. The ego is only destroying order. Simple traffic. Or people walking two-way in a crowded street. There is no real regulation there. We are not talking of vehicles here. But do they usually collide? They don't. Because the natural order is sufficient. You know what to do when somebody comes in front and you just... And the ego is not making that decision. But when the ego takes over, there are collisions. So we must investigate this claim of the ego, that all order and nice things and progress come from me. Do they come from you or do they happen in spite of you? Sometimes, accidentally. When the ego is not fully in control, that's when progress happens.
So mindful of time and the fact that we have to wrap the event up in order to allow the LSE to close the buildings down. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming here. Thank you so much for your insights into the difference between egoic and egoless action, in the process allowing me to learn how many of my actions are egoic. And I think nonetheless, we've agreed about a huge amount of things, particularly around veganism and some of the reasons in favor of it that I think are so important.
Can we have a couple of more questions if we have an extension? Because I could see a lot of hands raised.
Two more questions?
Yes,
yeah, we'll
yes,
do two more
yes,
questions.
Yes.
All right, let's take one from the front here.
I understand that, Professor Birch, you've looked at ancient traditions to develop modern laws, but have you found a tension between ancient traditions and modern science, like, for example, discovering sentience, and does it contradict with ancient beliefs that you've found in, like, the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and natural human inclinations, like how you spoke earlier about how the ego and humans, we have natural desires and ways in which we treat animals, but does science contradict this?
I mean, I don't think science directly contradicts ethical beliefs, because I think they're fundamentally different things. But I think science can be the beginning of a process of reflection through which we come to see that our ethical beliefs have led us into a very bad situation. I think that's how it's been, for example, with people who've been dropping lobsters into pans of boiling water for so long, telling themselves the lobsters feel absolutely nothing. And then science comes along and says, well, that's just not the case. I mean, there's horrible suffering going on for 2 minutes in some cases. So it's a good example of how science can be a source of serious challenge sometimes to cultural beliefs that have persisted for hundreds of years, but were in fact wrong. And you raised that great question about, do I think there are cases where science is in tension with what is in ancient texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads? I think in our discussion, we touched on one of them around plants, where from my own work, I really think there is a very big difference between plants and animals that makes the animals far more likely to be sentient than the plants. But in many of these ancient texts, they don't draw that distinction, and they see plants as also having forms of subjective experience. So I think even though there is a lot of convergence, it's not 100% convergence.
Right. Is your question regarding only the fact whether animals or plants are conscious, or are you talking about the full spectrum of ancient beliefs versus what science says? The full spectrum?
Yeah. The latter, I think. Yeah.
Okay. You see, science is wonderful at investigating the objects that you perceive, from the grand cosmic objects of the size of galaxies to the most miniature objects of the size of bosons and mesons and quarks and all those things, right? But irrespective of the size or the location, those are objects. They exist out there and they exist to somebody. And if you're talking of the ancient ones, I'll take the liberty of drawing a distinction. The ancient period is such a vast one that it covers practically everything. So I'll pick up that one thing that will make this comparison richer, which is the inward glance. Science looks outward. When you talk of Upanishads, for example, they say you have to look inward at the looker, at the subject of all objects. That does not mean that you have to ignore the objects. And it's so beautifully coming through in the Upanishads. They say, someone who looks only at what is outside suffers, falls into a deep place. But then they caution in the very next verse that somebody who ignores what is out there and continues to look only at himself falls into a place yet deeper. Therefore, when you are looking that side with genuine curiosity, but you are also careful at the intent of the one who is looking, that is called as Vidya and Avidya, the two directions of looking. When you have these both, then you reach your own inner special place. So science and the inner dimension, they are not in contradiction. In fact, they complement each other. Vidya plus avidya. You must look at what is out there. Otherwise, you will become superstitious. You will start according and attributing all kinds of rubbish reasons to natural phenomena. But you must also see why you are looking at a particular thing. Otherwise, you will become violent and exploitative. Right? So science and what you can call as spirituality, they must not only go together, they have to go together. And if spirituality is the name of holistic knowing, then science becomes a subset of spirituality. Science, spirituality, wisdom would say look that way, but also look this way. Science says look that way. So in that sense, science becomes a subset. So the kind of contradiction we often posit is false. There is no contradiction, there is not even harmony. They are one, and they are driven by the same spirit of inquiry. I want to know. And if I truly want to know, why will I know only that? I will know this as well. Purnamidah Purnamidam. This is full, that is full. I'm not going to confine my inquiry to only the sensual experiences. I'll also go into the experiencer. The last one maybe, quickly.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you both very much. This was great. I have many thoughts in my head. But the thing about the drunk cab driver analogy that you were saying, so if I understand it, kind of the diagnosis of the problem is internal, and kind of the solution is internal, in that the ego kind of needs to move toward the pole of love and, I don't know, be egoless, essentially, which is clear. But it seems the diagnosis of the problem is the violence, not the violence of a lion eating a gazelle, the violence of it being ego motivated. So that's the diagnosis of the problem. So how does the solution work in a timely way, though? If the transformation is internal and not systemic, like then I can do my bit. But that seems like quite slow potentially, I guess. And I'm struggling to hold these in together, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know if that's a question, but yeah.
Yes. Beautifully said. So another one from Richmond Park. There were these little trees, the baby trees, that had been offered nice protection in the form of bamboo fences. Yes, the crutches are needed precisely because the legs are not yet strong enough. Not yet strong enough. So there is no way regulation is not needed. There is no way green technology is not needed. What is not needed is the blind belief that regulation and technology are sufficient. Yes, you need regulation. Yes, you need technology. But as they say about governance sometimes, the best governance is when governance is required to the minimum. The best laws are that which are not. The best societies are the ones that require the minimum regulation. The best relationships are the ones that have the greatest space and the maximum freedom and the smallest list of do's and don'ts. Right? So yes, as long as the ego is there, we do need better dividers, and we also need the traffic police. All that is needed. But we must also know that if there is rampant alcoholism, we will have fatalities and casualties, and no amount of supervision or regulation is going to succeed. In fact, one of these drunkards will one day, through the very democratic process, rise to the topmost position and legalize drunk driving. So that's what's going to happen, because the voter is the ego, the consumer is the ego, which means ultimately the parliament has to be full of those who have been selected by the ego for its own dubious purposes. Right? So thinking that the solution can come from above is wishful thinking, because the above is simply a projection of the ego in the upward direction. Thinking that a solution is going to come from the outside, let's say from the scientific community, that too is wishful thinking, because science is funded by the common man. And if you say science is funded by the institutions, everything ultimately boils down to the common man. Therefore, I keep reiterating that mass education of the self is the solution. But you very rightly pointed out, it's a tree that bears fruit slowly. So till that point, yes, you do require all these things, but you must mark your success or measure it by the extent to which you can get rid of regulation. That's the true measure of success. So, but then if you do not even start with this education, the inner education, the mass education of the self, if you do not even start with it, then you have delayed it beyond redemption, especially when you know that it is a slow process.
Okay, so we heard the two extension questions, and with that, let's thank Acharya Prashant.
Very breezy, very smooth, and very nice of you to arrange this. And thank you so much for being here, and smooth and deep both. These are usually not qualities that go together. Thank you to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for visiting.
Thank you. This is for you.
Thank you.
This is for you.
Very kind. Thank you.
Acharya, we are going to get your signature. Thank you, Acharya. Thank you. Thank you very much.
A nice question that you asked.
Thank you.
So veganism may not be a solution for everyone. So what solution do you think is more suitable that includes other religions or everyone in general?
Ultimately, the very definition of religion is ego dissolution. Right? If you want to address all the kind of malpractices that happen in the name of religion, then you simply have to go to the root of religion itself, not discard religion. All these religious streams, they exist for the welfare of mankind, right? Everybody would agree to that. Religion exists so that mankind does better in the internal dimension.
Isn't, everything is down to we feeling pain? Isn't everything, just one thing, which is obviously, making us conscious decision, what is right and wrong?
All these people standing over here, none of them are experiencing pain, and very few of them would have experienced pain even in the last week or so. Is there anybody here who has not suffered in the last 1 week? Pain and suffering are distinct.
Yeah, pain physical pain and then suffering as well.
Right.
I'll take a selfie.
Sure.
That's okay.
Sure.
Charging और sessions के ज़रूरत है, live sessions के लिए.
We'll try. Which class?
8.
8. What's your name?
Abhi.
Abhi. What's the meaning of your name?
Fearless.
Thank you. Thanks for existing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody else. Thank you.
So this talk at London School of Economics is a part of London Climate Action Week, Why is animal consciousness, not just biodiversity or emission, central to the climate conversation in your view?
It was very, very interesting tonight, because we were discussing how to be fair to animals, and Professor Birch has done a lot of useful research on sentience, on which animals can be conclusively proven to be sentient and therefore deserve regulatory protection. And it's been good work which has resulted in saving the lives of a lot of animals, for example octopuses. But we asked, what is the essential difference between the animal that we are trying to save and the human being who is claiming to save the animal? And it turned out that 99 or 99.5% of biological stuff is common between the hunter and the hunted, between the animal and the human being. So what's the remaining 0.5%? Is that what makes us special? And the discussion was astounded to explore that this 0.5% is actually the cancer of the universe, because the 0.5% includes what is special and unique, very exclusive to Homo sapiens, and that is this manufacturing defect called the ego.
Thank you, Acharya ji.
Just download the Acharya Prashant app, and there you go to the community section, and you have live testimonials streaming in at the rate of 1 every 5 minutes. I'm seeing lives change in thousands, if not millions, every day in front of my own eyes. We are doing it.
Right.
We have actually done it.
Join the community of more than 2 lakh participants on the Acharya Prashant app. Your first month is completely free. You'll get full access to Gita Mission. On the app, you will get regular live sessions, daily exclusive conversations with Acharya Prashant, access to the vibrant Gita community, wisdom exams, curated news, audiobooks, quotes, and much more. Search Acharya Prashant on Google Play Store or Apple App Store and download now.